Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, and I hope you enjoy what you're about to find out about. This is about the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study and the role of life experiences in shaping brain development. I'm Richard Tate. I'm the Regional Program Manager for Nurture the Next, which is an evidence-based home visiting nonprofit operating in Tennessee, and glad to have you. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Well, if I can get what's going on. Ah, there, okay. And this is brought to you, the state of Tennessee was really involved in promotion of ACEs training over the last few years. And as it says here, our mission is to try to change the culture of Tennessee so that our philosophy, policies, programs, and practices utilize the latest brain science to prevent and mitigate the impact of adverse childhood experiences. I mentioned there. All right. So we're going to talk about successful parenting and healthy child development in particular, and how healthy child development, you can see here, it impacts pretty much everything. Children who grow up in safe, stable, nurturing environments do much better in school. They have greater economic productivity as adults. They're usually more actively engaged in their community life and as citizens, and also, running for office and things like that. And also, it has a major impact on lifelong health outcomes. Just as, or more importantly, it leads to successful parenting of the next generation. And when we have an ongoing process of raising healthy, successful generations, then this strengthens our communities and we end up with a healthier economy too. So really, this touches everything, and the way the organization that I work for, we're trying to promote good parenting because that has so much influence over everything that comes after. So we're going to talk about several basic concepts. The first is brain architecture. This is important because the early years of life affect the architecture of the maturing brain. As it emerges, the quality of that architecture establishes either a sturdy or fragile foundation for all the development and behavior that follows. And as it says here, getting things right the first time is easier than trying to fix them later. And we use that analogy, brain architecture. We start with the foundation, and the foundation is what's going on in from the last trimester up until the first, really, the first 6 months to a year are critical. And then even after that, up until about 3 or 4 years, everything that is happening around the child is having an effect on that architecture, and how that architecture, how firm that foundation is going to determine whether or not what kind of problems or what issues we may run into later on. Oh, no. Okay. The next one is serve and return interactions. This is something as simple as, if you are around babies, if you've ever been around babies, we can't overstress how important it is to communicate with the babies. And of course, they're not speaking whatever language their native language is going to be when they're born, but they are listening and they are observing, and their brains are forming. I think it's a million. Yeah, I think it's a million new synapses every second for an extended period of time, which means that I recently saw something that said that there are something like 1 billion synapses in a brain cell the size of a grain of sand. And so children learn not because you're consciously teaching them all the time, but through observation. So they're listening to you, they're looking at you. They can gather information about your emotional state from the sound of your voice, from your facial expressions and gestures. And so serve and return is really important, because when they're crying, when they're trying to get your attention, what they're doing is they're making bids for you to engage with them. And so it's, eye contact, skin to skin contact, all those things are critical. And as it says, the serve and return are essential for the development of healthy brain circuits. And so in turn, systems that support relationships in early care settings also support the development of sturdy brain architecture. And these relationships continue to be vital in adolescence in order to reinforce brain architecture. When you get to be around 4 or 5 years old, your brain starts a process that we refer to as pruning. And that's if you're familiar with working out in the garden, in the yard, wherever you're pruning bushes and flowers and things like that to help stimulate growth by getting rid of branches or whatever that are just sapping energy. It's the same way, excuse me, it's the same thing here. For example, we use speech as an example. By the time your baby is around a year old, it has about 80% of everything it needs to know about its native language. It may not understand the meaning of all the words, and most definitely, they probably can't talk very much. They may babble a little bit, but usually don't have a very large vocabulary. But they're picking up language, not because you're giving them grammar lessons or anything like that, but just strictly observation. And they can understand the emotional context of conversations, the emotional content of conversations through your tone of voice and volume and things like that. So this is, one of the reasons that it's important if you're interested in having a bilingual child, if you can raise the child in a bilingual environment or expose it to another language throughout its early years, then they're much more likely to be able to speak another language. Because again, by the time you're about 4 or 5, those things start shutting down. And if you studied a foreign language in whether it might be elementary school, middle school, high school, college, whatever, it's much, much harder as you get older to be able to do that because those parts of the brain that control speech have already pruned away all of those, those synapses, the connections that haven't been used up to that point. Let's see here. Okay. We also talk about stress, and we categorize stress in 3 different categories for this purpose. First is positive stress. We've all experienced positive stress. If you have kids, most of them are not crazy about going to the doctor for shots. Let's say they're going to take them for shots. Well, that's not something that, I've never known a child who enjoyed going and getting shots, but getting a shot is something that is maybe, stressful in the moment, but it usually goes away pretty quick. They're usually, here, hand them a lollipop, everything's okay. It's not anything that's, that has makes lasting damage. Also things like, maybe they move, maybe you're moving from one neighborhood to the other, one house to another. They're starting a school, the first day of school each year. One of my son's friends would the last couple of weeks before every new school year, and this was all the way up until almost high school, would just be totally stressed out. It just made him so anxious thinking about it. But these things are good for us in a way because they help us prepare for much more stressful situations that occur later. Then there's tolerable stress, and tolerable stress can be tragic events. And as it says, unavoidable events like natural disaster or losing loved ones, family and friends, and never underestimate the trauma that a child experiences when a pet dies, because for children and for a lot of adults, your pets are part of the family too. So when a pet dies, it can be really, it can really hurt. But if you've got people around you and the child has people around them to help comfort them, reassure them, provide support, then these events don't last. They don't do lasting damage. And eventually, you may be sad when you think about it or whatever, but it's not enough to like derail your development. On the other hand, toxic stress, which is ongoing repeated exposure to abuse or neglect, that is bad for brain development. There are hormones, there are stress hormones, cortisol being the first among them, that are produced in times of great stress. And cortisol has the ability to do damage physiologically. It can do damage to the connections in your brain. It can also affect other parts of your body, your health. In fact, this study that all this is based on, one of the things that led to it was a study that one of the doctors involved was doing, trying to connect the dots to see if there was a correlation between emotional stress or emotional stressors and heart disease. And we do know now that toxic stress can have a major effect on heart disease and other health outcomes. So if there aren't any supportive adults to help sort of, offset the stress response, those hormones can damage developing structures, and the result is an increased vulnerability to lifelong physical and mental health problems, including addiction. So this is a photograph. I've seen this for probably about 20 years. My mental health background, I've been working in mental health for about 30 years. This is something I saw very early on in my career that was just sort of being uncovered at the time. And what you see on the left is a healthy brain. These are 2 3-year-old brains. The PET scan on the left is the brain of a normal child. And if you look, you can see the areas where there's a lot of red and yellow, brightly colored areas. That's where that's where the electrical activity is. That's what's going on. And where you see low, like blue and black, that's low activity. And as it says here at birth, only primitive structures, such as the brain stem, which is the center, the dead center of it, are fully functional. And that's where your autonomic responses live. Those are the things in your body that operate without you think about it. You don't have to think about breathe in, breathe out. You don't have to think, heartbeat, 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 that things. These are things that part of your brain is designed to keep you alive. All right. It's also where your fight, flight, freeze, or what's the other one now? One of them they say flirt. It's those responses, those automatic responses. That's where those reside. All right. So that's the only part in a newborn that's fully functional. And then in regions on the left, I said like the temporal lobes, which are those 2 ovals at the top. This is where things are being wired up, right? And this has a lot to do with that. Those areas have a lot to do with regulating emotional responses, and also how input from your sensory systems, how it's being placed or how it's being recorded, and what you do with it. All right. Now, the one on the right, the brain on the right, is the PET scan of a brain of a Romanian orphan who was institutionalized shortly after birth. And it shows the effect of extreme deprivation in infancy. And if you're old enough to remember when the Soviet Union started kind of breaking up and what they called the Eastern Bloc in Eastern Europe, where that part of the world started opening up to the outside for the first time since back in the 40s and the 50s. Westerners were going in and they were finding these baby warehouses, really is what they were. And there would often be buildings where there might be several hundred, up to 500 or more children, babies, infants in one building with just a handful of staff. And I'm talking about maybe 4 to 6 people 24/7. So we talked, going back to the discussing serve and return, think about it. If you and 5 of your friends were taking care of 500 babies, could you even keep up with, changing diapers or feeding, much less picking them up and comforting them and talking to them and playing with them? So this shows what that deprivation, what the effect of it is. You can see that the temporal lobes, which again regulate emotions, receive input from the senses, they're almost completely shut down. And then if you look at the rest of it, the only area, well, you look at the front of the brain again, which is where your frontal cortex, which is where your conscious thought resides, and that's where that's the part of the brain you use to make conscious decisions and try to figure things out, sort out plans and stuff like that. That's very quiet, and so what we usually say is we kind of think of it as when somebody gets really angry, it's lights out up here. It's the, the front of your brain is like shut down, and all of the all the electrical activity tends to flare up. It's going to be seen most vividly in that the base of the brain and the brainstem, and or what we frequently refer to as the lizard brain, because that's the part of the brain that everything that has a brain has at least that much. Again, because that's the part that just kind of keeps you alive and keeps you breathing and your heart beating and all that stuff. So when you look at this, and then you look at look at the one on the right, look at the one on the left, and again, we're talking about look at the temporal lobes about the emotions, regulating emotions. How well do you think that the child on the right, how well are they going to do with regulating emotions? And having started my career working in a psychiatric hospital, a residential psychiatric hospital for children and adolescents, we had about half a dozen kids from Romania or Eastern Europe, and that had been adopted by American families, brought in, and it was really sad. It was very heartbreaking to see, because these kids, to a large extent, were non-communicative. They weren't unable to form attachments. They had a really difficult time, developing relationships with the rest of the family. We had one who was mute, who would not speak at all. They tend to be very reactive and act out a lot, get very upset over very small things. And this is why, because they don't have that ability to regulate the emotions. And so while we're talking about neglect, we talk about abuse and neglect. And actually, in our country, if you're looking at child abuse / child neglect is much more common. Probably makes about 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10 cases in our country are more about things that people did not do that they should have done, as opposed to things they did that they weren't supposed to do. Now, going back to the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, okay, this is where your executive functioning is. Well, that's a group of skills that help you focus on multiple streams of information. Something like, I think it's like 9 million messages go through that part of the brain every minute. And so you have to be able to deal with multiple streams of information at the same time, pick out what you need, the information that's relevant, and then you use that to set goals, make plans, make decisions in light of available information, change plans, and resist hasty actions. So the base of the brain is much more about like emergency type situations, really no thinking going into it. But the front of the brain is the part of the brain that usually is engaged and is usually kind of controlling things. It's a key biological foundation for school readiness and also long-term outcomes in health and employability. And although there are sensitive periods of development, again, the last trimester through the first 3 to 6 months of life, and then again, usually just before puberty occurs, there's another paring away or pruning of synapses and connections that aren't being used, and an explosion of neural growth. So you're getting a lot of new brain cells, and so that's the reason if you have teenagers, if you work with teenagers, if you've been around any teenagers, you frequently see a major shift in the way they behave or how they respond to things as they approach like the middle teen years, 15, 16. Of course, it all depends on, the child, because none of them develop exactly the same, but you frequently will see more mature behavior after around that time, because this is all of a sudden they're sort of like doing some rebuilding. The foundation may have been a problem. There might have been some issues along the way, but now we have an opportunity to sort of rebuild and repair. So improving the air traffic control helps with stress management across your lifespan. Again, if you've been nurtured and raised in stable environments, you've got a lot of support helping you through times of stress. And anybody who has been the parent of a teenager knows that there's plenty of those times. But improved air traffic control or executive functioning helps keep their attention focused. It helps with problem solving, planning ahead, behavior regulation, impulse control, and also adjusting to new circumstances. So again, that can be built at any point across the lifespan. You can always build on it and sort of improve your ability to do those things. So we're going to watch a video on how brains are built. Let's see.
Our lives, actually the fact that physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains are just absolutely in our experiences. Just as a house needs a foundation for the walls of room, a brain needs a good basis around positive interactions.
Hey, Richard, for some reason it's not showing on our side.
Oh, it's not?
Mm-mm.
Well, It's not, the video is not showing?
No, I see a big black screen. I don't know what they see. Yeah. I don't know why, but it's
Neither.
just,
Hang on a minute here. Let me see if I can. Okay, and you don't see anything now.
no, sir.
Well, All right, okay. Well, I see what you're seeing now. Now that's okay. I've never had this issue before. Do you see anything now?
I see a big orange box and says adverse childhood experiences.
Okay. Do you see where it says how brains are built?
I see it now. Earlier I did not, but I do see it now.
Okay, well, let's try. How about now?
Ah, yes, that works.
Try it again. Sorry.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across the net, various forms of communication pass between the two. From eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious, ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he's at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place. One of the things that sturdy brain architecture supports is the development of basic emotional and social skills, an important group of skills which scientists call executive function and self-regulation, can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport. All those planes landing and taking off, and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead and remember, and follow lots of rules. Like all of us, kids have to react to things happening in the world around them, while also dealing with worries, temptations, and obligations on their minds. As these demands for attention pile up, air traffic control helps the child regulate the flow of information, prioritize tasks, and above all, find ways to manage stress and avoid mental collisions along the way. Having this ability is a necessity for positive and level mental health. Developing effective air traffic control, overcoming toxic stress, and building solid brain architecture are things kids can't do on their own. And since strong societies are made up of healthy, contributing individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all young people have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need for positive development. To build better futures, we need to build better brains.
Okay. All right, now here's another one, and this one is more about the study itself and some of the effects that we have established of traumatic experiences in youth, and they're going to talk about the ACEs and the ACE scores. Let's see if I can do it this way. All right. See this?
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Anda and Felitti tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems, and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
Okay, and just as a sidebar, the organization that I work for owns the screening rights to a film that a lot of that you just saw came from. It's called Resilience. And so that's something that I have on a CD in my office, and I offer that. You know, we can do screenings, we can set up screenings, we can do ACEs trainings in the schools or homes, or I do them all over the place, and all that's free of charge. The Resilience film is a really good introduction. It's about an hour long, but not only are you getting facts and figures, but you're also seeing how people are approaching using this information in several different settings, including schools. There's another one we have called Paper Tigers, which is about the adoption of trauma-informed practice in an alternative school and the remarkable changes that occurred over just a year after they adopted these. So this is something for you to consider if you're parents or if you have friends who are parents. If you're interested, if you can contact Sandy and let me know, and we can see about setting something up. All right, so back to the training. ACEs can have a lasting effect on health. It affects obesity rates, diabetes rates, depression, suicide attempts, STDs, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, broken bones. It also has effect on, risky behaviors, in particular, smoking, alcoholism, drug use rates, and then life potential. It has an effect on graduation rates, academic achievement, lost time from work. Now, this slide right now that we're looking at is, let's see, what is it, 8 years old. There's been a lot more research has been done since then, so there are more involved. But at the time this was put together, ACEs had already been found to have what's called a graded dose relationship with 40 plus outcomes to date. And what that means is, it's like, okay, although it doesn't work this way, but if you've got a prescription, you take your first dose, it helps a little bit. You take your second dose, well, now you're helping a little bit more, and on and on and on. It builds. Well, the same thing with ACEs. And all ACEs is it's traumatic events. Okay, it's traumatic events, and we tend to think of them in terms of traumatic things that have happened to people before they hit 18, but you can be traumatized after that, obviously. So, anyway, so that's over 40 outcomes to date. And if you notice the screen flashing by, it's like talking about suicide rates, all these other things, and it works like this. So if you've suffered one ACE, you can see in yellow, this is your risk. 2, 3, 4, 5. So it works in a stair-step fashion. which is something that before this, excuse me, sorry, I'm having allergy problems today. Before this study came out, nobody had ever seen anything like this before. And so it met with a lot of resistance at first because doctors and experts were saying, well, if this was true, we'd have known this all along, but we know that's not how it works. Science sort of builds on itself. And so we learn more and more and more as time goes by. And that's definitely been the case here. So they took the 17,337 people that they involved in this study, and it's what's called a longitudinal study. And they followed them, and some of them are still being followed. This is, like I said, the study was done in 1995. So they're still doing checking back with the original group to see, that's how they established it, said, like, if you have 6 or more, that your life expectancy could be cut by 20 years. So they took all of these, they did really detailed questionnaires about health issues, physical health, mental health, and then they also had questions about people's childhood. What was your childhood like? What did you, what are the things you experienced in childhood? They took all these answers, they put them together. They had a medical statistician take all this information, and he ended up breaking down what they were hearing in terms of traumatic events that children experienced, broke them into 3 major categories. So there's abuse, there's neglect, and there's household dysfunction. All right. And then under each one of those, he broke it down into the major types. So under abuse, you had physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. And as you can see here, out of that 17,337 people that they involved in this study, 10.6% of them had suffered physical abuse. 28.3% of them had suffered some form of emotional abuse. 20.7% had suffered some form of sexual abuse. And one of the things that kind of helps, sort of anchor this information was we've known for a really long time that about 1 out of every 5 adults were sexually abused or traumatized in some way during their childhood. About 1 out of every 3 girls or women will be, have some sort of sexual abuse or assault. Will suffer that before they reach 18. About 1 out of every 3 to 5 boys. So we already knew that. All right. So this sort of reinforced that. Neglect, 14.8% had been, they reported some sort of physical neglect as they were growing up, and then 9.9% emotional neglect. And the physical neglect can be anything from medical neglect, could be, let's see, food, not being fed properly, not getting proper nutrition, what they call environmental neglect. And then the last category is household dysfunction. So what they found there was 19.4% of those 17,337 people had lived in a home where someone suffered from a mental illness. 4.7% had lived in a home where they had an incarcerated relative, a member of the immediate family, had spent time in jail. I want to say I think it was like a month to, or more, 6 months or more, something like that. This number doesn't apply here in Tennessee because in Tennessee, that number is 3 times that. We have the 3rd largest rate of incarcerated relatives or incarcerated parents of any state in the country. About 15% of all the parents in the state of Tennessee have been or children have been raised in homes where they've had an incarcerated relative. So for a child, someone going to jail or someone going to prison, that's pretty much like somebody dying because they were there one day and now they're not. And then in a lot of cases, people who are in prison don't want to see the kids, or they don't want the kids to see them in that kind of situation. And so now you have an adult that was a big part of their life who now is just like they've disappeared. So it's a pretty serious issue to deal with. And like I said, a lot of kids in Tennessee have that to deal with. 12.7% of them had seen their mother treated violently, or their moms were victims of domestic violence. 26.9, almost 27%, grew up in a home where someone had a substance abuse issue, and then 23.3% lived in a household where there was a divorce. Now, since the original study was done, there have been ACEs that we've expanded that, the questions, and I think these came out, yeah, the Philadelphia ACE study. They added witnessing violence as a traumatic experience, living in unsafe neighborhoods, experiencing racism, living in foster care, and experiencing bullying. And those are called ACEs of social location, social trauma and social location. So here's what the study looked like when they did the survey here in the state of Tennessee. So they had 39%, and all this is self-reported. You know, this is people just answering these questions. And like I said, there's 10 of them. It's yes or no. You know, did this happen to you? Did this happen to you? Yes or no. All right. So 10 questions, very easy. 39% said nothing. They never suffered any kind of traumatic experience as children. 22% of them had experienced one traumatic experience. 12.2 had 2 ACEs. 9.3 had 3. 17.5 had 4 or more. So that means overall 61% of the adults in Tennessee that took part in this survey had suffered at least one ACE. 27% had 3 or more. And that's, excuse me, that bottom number, that 27%, that's higher than it was in the original study. So that's pretty sobering. And one of the things that the study helped establish is that it sort of put to rest that whole, myth about these things only happen in certain places. These only happen in certain neighborhoods or only in certain parts of town or certain cities or whatever. And that's not true. What it pretty firmly established is this stuff is everywhere. I mean, ACEs are happening still on a daily basis all over our country. And, I always tell when I'm working with a live audience, you work with a lot of teachers. If I've got 50 teachers in there, then I know that probably at least 12 of them, somewhere around 12 or 13, have 3 or more ACEs, because there have been close to 100 studies done following this up, and these numbers about the number of ACEs that people have suffered very rarely ever move more than a couple of percentage points or more. So it's, these are things that happen everywhere. And in fact, the people who were subjects of the original study, I don't think that slide's on here. Let me look and see. No, we'll go back. Okay. Most of the majority of the people that were involved in this, they were in San Diego County, by the way, which is a very wealthy part of our country. They were the majority was overwhelmingly white, college educated, lived in economic situations that were middle class or above. So, these were not folks who were living in what we would, commonly think of as like high risk areas or living in high risk households. From the outside, it looks like, okay, these are the folks who they've got, they got it made, they got it good. But when you started asking them these questions in private and they started answering them on their own, well, we found out that, there's a lot going on that we just didn't realize. And that's a pretty sobering thought. So anyway, I say that because I have an ACE score. Most everybody I know has an ACE score. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but it is good information to have because it kind of helps, be prepared, or kind of gives you an idea of some of the things that you may be at risk for as you grow older in the way of like health issues and things like that. All right, let's see. So we'll go, okay. So now we're going to talk about fostering resilience, and resilience is the ability to kind of overcome, adversity. So you're able to kind of, work with what you got, and hopefully you're going to have folks around you that help support you, and you've got somebody there to listen to you. And this is about fostering resilience, and because contrary to what you may have heard all of your life, children don't just snap back. Things that happen to them when they're very, very early, at their very early ages, they don't just go away. They don't just forget them. Their minds may forget them, but their body doesn't. And there are memories stored in there of things that happened that they may not even realize. So, resilience is not something that you're just born with. Resilience is something that you have to learn. It's a skill set. And you need people around you to role model how to come back from adversity. You have to have people who role model how to deal with adversity, and you have to have support. So anyway, so let's watch this video.
You can think of child development as a scale that has two sides. A child's scale is placed in a community and has spaces on either side where experiences and environmental influences stack up over the course of development. One side gets stacked with negative factors like stress, violence, and neglect, while the other side gets loaded with positive factors like supportive relationships, skill-building opportunities, and community resources. In the same way that the weight on a teeter-totter affects the direction it tips, the factors that a child is exposed to affect how they turn out, the outcomes of their development. But the way the scale tips and the outcomes a child experiences are also a function of the position of the scale's fulcrum, which is like the genetic makeup of the child. The position of the fulcrum affects how the scale responds to factors that get stacked on either side and how easily it tips. We know that fulcrums start in different places for different children, and that this genetic starting point is an important factor in how a child responds to experiences and how they turn out. We also know that the position of the fulcrum isn't fixed. It's a sliding set point. Over time, the things that load and tip the scale can actually shift the position of the fulcrum. There are points in human development when this fulcrum is easier to shift. During these shiftable periods, our biology can be changed, making us more or less able to withstand negative weight that gets stacked on the scale. One of these shiftable periods is early childhood, and another is adolescence. That's why it's so important to make sure that children have positive experiences, especially early on, and to continue positive supports throughout development. By providing positive experiences during these sensitive periods of development and offloading negative weight, we can shift the fulcrum, making children more able to bear the weight of negative experiences later on, making them more resilient. So resilience isn't just about individual children. It's about the environments and experiences that get stacked on the resilience scale. Resilient societies are those that figure out how to stack more positives than negatives onto the children who will become workers and citizens.
Okay, so basically it works like this. You know, we want to stress that ACEs, it's an important piece of information for you to have about yourself and also about the people around you. We've done an awful lot of work in the school systems. We've done classes on these with I want to say it's about 30%, maybe 40% of all of the schools in the Hamilton County school system. I've done presentations to, or one of the folks that does this with me. Excuse me, because we felt the teachers in particular, it's very important for them to get this information because they spend as much time in a lot of cases with these children as their parents can. And so they're a really important resource. It's important that they understand what's going on with kids. I always use the sort of like, I guess, the example that, the child who's staring out the window, who's not paying very much attention to you or whatever, it's not necessarily because they don't care what you're saying or that they're not, they don't want to learn. It's because they've got other things, much more important things on their mind. And, the child who did not have dinner last night is not sitting there worrying about the math test. I mean, if they didn't eat that morning, they're hungry. Or maybe there's something going on in the home, mom and dad are fighting, or there's something like that. They've got other really important issues on their mind. So it's not just that they don't care or they're just, there are no, and I'll say this, there are no bad children, that they just don't exist. There are no bad children. There are children with really bad problems and really bad circumstances, but in the overwhelming majority of all these cases, kids can be helped and kind of help brought back to where they need to be. And all they need is they need someone, and it can be just one person. They need a safe, stable relationship. They need to have somebody they know they can talk to, that they can trust, that when they go and they tell them what their problems are, whatever, they're not going to be judged. They're not going to be accused of lying. They're going to be listened to. And so I would, I strongly urge all of you who are parents, when your kids are trying to tell you what's going on, don't talk, just listen. All right. My grandmother used to tell me when I was growing up that you have two ears and one mouth for a very specific reason. And that's because you should be listening twice as much as you talk. And so if your child is sitting there and they're telling you about something that happened during the day, it may not seem like such a big thing to you, but for them and for their point of view, it is a major thing. I do know that, my wife is a teacher. My dad was a teacher. I have a sister who is a teacher, a sister-in-law who's a teacher. I've got a couple of nephews and nieces who are. My youngest son is in college right now, studying to be a teacher. And I know that the 99.9% of the teachers out there, are doing what they do because they want to do some good. They want to help kids. They want to teach kids, but not everybody, has the same understanding about issues. And it can be very difficult when you've got a lot of kids in the classroom to kind of try to deal with all of them separately. So, but it's important to know the kids and to know what their situations are, and to be to be a resource, to be somebody that's an ally. And I mean, I can't overstress that. So as it says here, our ultimate goal is to ensure that every child's relationships and environments are safe, free from physical and emotional harm, stable, familiar routines, people and places. And that's something that's really, really important. Things like bedtime, when you have your meals, all that kind of stuff. Structure, 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 structure. Kids really thrive on knowing what's coming next. They do much better than when things are changing from day to day and there's a lot of chaos around. And you could try that out probably in any elementary school in the country. If you went in there and held lunch back for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, you're going to have an awful lot of kids getting really unhappy very quickly. Kids will argue with you about going to bed. They'll argue about how much TV time they've got, all that stuff. But when you are taking the time to set up routines and follow routines and to explain to them, here's why we do this, here's how we're going to do this, then they feel safer because it's, they're not waiting for the next shoe to drop. And then nurturing, sensitively care and encourage development. Play with your kids, play with them, spend time with them, talk to them, serve and return. They don't get too old to be hugged. They might, pull away, especially, the boys when they start to be getting 10, 11, it's like, oh, don't do that. But we all thrive on affection. We all thrive on affection, and we all thrive on attention. And we all want to be heard when something's bothering us. So what can be done about ACEs across the lifespan? Adopt trauma-informed school policies and practices. Let's see. And we have a number of schools in Hamilton County and across the country that are working on doing this. And as using that very short example, you may remember from the beginning, instead of just like automatic expulsions or out of school suspensions, more and more schools are adopting in-school suspensions. You don't want to train a child to think that, okay, if I act up enough, they'll send me home and then I can go home and I can watch video games all day. So it's much better to have them in school, and also to find out what the cause of the behavior is, because all behavior has meaning. It's, when kids act out, it's not just because they don't have anything else to do. It's something is driving that, and that usually has an emotional root and a root cause. And it's important that we try to find out what those are. Home visiting to pregnant women and families with newborns. That's what the organization that I work for, Nurture the Next, that's what we do. Is we have family support specialists who go to homes. They visit with moms, prenatal moms. And postnatal, if you enroll, you can stay in the program until your child is 5 or until they enter a school. And these are folks who work basically sort of like parent coaches. And we get a lot of first-time moms, a lot of teen moms, and all they know is what they've been told or what they've seen, in their own families. And that's not always it's not always the best practices that what they're seeing or what they're being told. And there's, information is coming along all the time. And what my grandmother believed in as far as her child rearing practices and what we would consider today as the best child rearing practices, those things aren't necessarily the same, not because she didn't want to be a good parent or a good grandparent or whatever, but because we learn as we go, and each generation is adding to the knowledge. Access to integrated health care. It's really important for your child and for you to see a physician on a regular basis to just kind of keep tabs on what's going on. Access to high quality, affordable childcare in pre-K. That's an issue for a lot of families. Business and organization policies that support working parents. That's something else that, I'm very proud. The organization I work for has very, very parent friendly policies about sick pay and family leave and things like that. Parent support programs for teens and teen pregnancy prevention programs. I mean, it's not uncommon for us to work with a child who's expecting a child who's never even held a baby before, much less had one, had to take care of it, 24 hours a day. Access to mental health and substance abuse treatment, intimate partner violence prevention, health system investment communities, social supports for parents, bringing community development and childhood development together, and sufficient income support for low-income families. And the big message we have for you is this, is when something's going on, when somebody's acting out instead of asking what's wrong with them, ask what's happened to you. Okay, again, because they don't, people don't act out for no reason. So anyway, thank you. Let's see, Sandy, are you still there?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up. Unless if somebody has any questions or comments or whatever, I'd be glad to answer them or talk to them.
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions?
I kind of have a question.
Yeah.
So I've taken like the ACEs before, and there were like a couple questions that kind of confused me. Like not confused me, but like the question about, did you like see your mother get abused? What
Mhm.
about like if your father was abusive or your mother was abusive to your father? Like, do you answer that question the same?
Yeah, you might want, you could always cross, but that happens, and we know, and you got to remember, okay, this study and these questions were formulated in 1995, so we're almost 30 years down the road from that. The way we look at things or what we understand about situations like that is a lot different. I mean, 30 years ago, people were talking some about, postnatal depression,
Yeah.
but nobody was talking, or postpartum depression. Nobody was talking about postpartum depression for dads, but we know now that it does exist. And that's something that we've learned recently. And as time has gone by, our court systems, our medical systems have not shifted away from it, because I think mom in our society is always going to be like, that's like the apex. She is the top of the pyramid there as far as family life is concerned. But we're learning and more, and people are being more accepting about what the father's role is. Whether they're married or not or whatever, how important the relationship between a child and their dad is. And that, women aren't always the shy, retiring, wallflowers that, that people believe them to be for centuries or whatever. So yeah, there's a lot of domestic abuse that does involve fathers being the victims or men being the victims. So that's a good question, and if you're in, and if you're in a situation ever again, we always give out, there's a place called ACES to Hide, ACESTOOHIGH.com, that you can go online and they'll, you'll answer those questions, but you'll also answer some other questions about what we call protective factors. So there are things to offset. So you may have had you could have an ACE score of 5, but maybe the outcome for you is not nearly as serious because you had parents who were very loving and supportive, or you had grandparents or families and friends. So there are things that offset. So again, it's not like there's not a one size fits all sort of model.
Okay.
But I mean, if I was giving you the test, if we were doing this in a group setting or whatever, I'd be very fine with, coming and saying, okay, what about this? And I would say, yes, I definitely answer it, cross out mom and put dad or however you want to do it, because it's seeing a parent.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting about the ACE scores, it's not which ACEs you've suffered, it's how many different ACEs have you suffered. That's what the cumulative effect, that's where that comes. So we can't weigh sexual abuse against emotional neglect, for example, or physical abuse against, dad's been in prison for the last 3 years. Those, it doesn't work that way. So it's a let's see, it's an arithmetic sort of thing. It's 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 is how you end up with the total.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Good question.
I also had a question for you.
Okay.
So you said back in the PowerPoint, I can't remember which one, that a lot of times like some of these experiences were when you were over 18. Have you seen like, I don't know, that just is really interesting to me because it's talking about like childhood. What kind of like experiences do you think like would fit an older person that would be one of these?
Well, I don't know that all 10 of them, would necessarily be the concern. But but okay, let's take rape. That's going to be traumatic no matter how old you are, whether you're male or female. That's always going to be traumatic. Now, it's not like retroactive, so it's not going to have any effect on your life beforehand, but it's definitely going to affect your mindset and the way you react, and it can affect your physical health, your mental health, everything from that point forward. Or divorce, which is even more common. I have had several friends in my lifetime whose parents have waited until they got out of college or beyond. And then it's like, okay, this is the day we've been waiting for. Mom and I are splitting up. We only stay together. Well, those folks were every bit as devastated as any kid I've ever known whose parents were divorced, because divorce is really traumatic when you think about it, because all it is for a child, whether it's an adult child or a really young child, it's having your belief system. This is how the world operates. Well, that's just been torn up into little tiny pieces and thrown to and let's see where things land. So that's traumatic no matter what, and that can be really hard to accept. So I would say most of those. Now again, it's more important, or I guess it has more of an effect the earlier they happen to you, because you're still developing as a person, as a personality. Your brain is still developing. And so these are things that can derail things, maybe even more, because let's see, well, again, let's go back to, the rape example. A child who experiences that has no understanding whatsoever of what's going on. There's no, they know somewhere, okay, this is not right. This hurts. This doesn't feel good, whatever. An adult, on the other hand, can probably reason through some of that, maybe knows where the resources are. Who do I go to for help? What do I do in this case? And they have the options of seeing a doctor or seeing a therapist or whatever. But a lot of these things, and not just rape, a lot of these things, a lot of these traumas and abuses, these are things that people they don't want to talk about it. They don't share them with everybody. They hold it inside. And that's the stuff that really kind of helps, kind of poison your system, is you're holding these secrets. And that can be very damaging in the long term. Did that answer your question?
No, it answered it. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Awesome.
Sandy, do you have any questions?
I don't, but I really loved, I hadn't seen some of the videos that you had in there, and I really enjoyed those, and I learned a lot. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today.
Well, if you'll remind me at some point, have you got like a DVD player or anything there? You have a disc drive in your laptop. Well, I've got a little portable DVD player in my office that we use. If you want to come around sometime and borrow that resilience video and just sit and watch it in your office, like I said, it's really good because they talk to doctors and Ann Felitti, the ones who did the original survey, the original study.